This is Eric Metaxas' show with John Zmirak, and they're talking about Europe and possibly America losing cultural confidence.
Take this song to my lover. Shoot, shoot, little bird. Go and find my love. Hey folks, it's the Eric Metaxas show. I'm talking to John Zmirak. John Zmirak, there's so much to talk about. We're talking about the Pope John Paul II's vision in 1993 of Islam conquering Europe. So what is your take then on that? I mean, it seems to me that what happens typically, if we know this, right? Every battle has two people involved. One is the aggressor, and then the other is the defender. And if the defender doesn't really believe in the rightness of its cause, that contributes to things. I mean, the condition of the Roman Empire when the Visigoths and the Vandals and the Goths attacked it had a lot to do. It wasn't just the strength of those tribes; it was the weakness of the Roman Empire. It seems to me that right now Europe has lost cultural confidence. I can't remember who came up with that phrase, but it's correct. We in the West, liberals in America, have lost cultural confidence. We don't know who we are. We don't know what we believe. And if you don't know what you believe, people who really know what they believe, like beheading ISIS.
So, the reason in America we don't know what we believe is because we're losing the perspective of our founding and founding principles, and our public schools are a monopoly that's forcing an education that ignores the goodness of America and its founding principles and the book that those principles were based on.
Marauders, they will win.
Right. I mean, cultural competence, we've lost the desire to live. I mean, most of Europe has a birth rate so low that the population is shrinking. In other words, European countries, virtually no couples are having 2.3 kids, which is what's required to even keep the population stable. It's tragic that in Hungary, the birth rate is something like 0.9. That means if you get two couples, among them, there'll be one kid to replace the four of them.
Yeah, that's not good. In case anybody's scoring. It's an extraordinary thing. There was a great book by George Weigel called the Cube and the Cathedral, where he talks about this issue. I think that you see the same thing over and over, is that people who are on the more liberal side of the spectrum seem to have this idea that people are bad. I don't want to bring a child into this world, and so but conservatives. I mean, I was yesterday in Lakeland, Florida, with the wonderful Mutz family. They are just they're heroes. They had 12 kids. They lost their first or second child in an accident. I can't remember the details, but they decided out of that tragedy they wanted to have as many kids as they could. And these kids are so delightful, so wonderful, and they've had, I think, 12 kids. And I think you so rarely see that among people who aren't very serious about their Christian faith. You see it among people who are serious about their Islamic faith. People who...
Jewish faith.
And Jewish faith. You see it obviously among Catholics. But people who are theologically or politically liberal tend to think that, I don't want to bring kids into the world. I mean, you've heard this since, Malthus got the upper hand in the 60s, and we kind of acted like the world's going to end and it's all going to heck, and we need to have as small a carbon footprint as we can. It's really strange philosophy.
Well, yeah, I once wrote an article called, "Is it fair to bring a child into a world with such a low birth rate?"
Oh, John, that's too clever. That's killer. Killer.
But in parts it's true, because if most people aren't families, they're not going to accommodate families. They're not going to have child-friendly policies. Look at how annoyed people get when you bring children to church or you bring children to public spaces. They're like, "Oh no, that small primate creature is making too much noise. It's irritating my organic vegan meal." But really, it boils down. The environmentalism is just a pretext. if you really do the math and you think this life is all there is and there's nothing in the afterlife, really does it add up that people have a net more pleasure than pain? And will it bring you more pleasure than pain to bring a child into the world? Probably not. Probably it's more fun to just watch more Netflix, maybe get a Persian cat, and travel more. And that's what happened in Europe. Once contraception arrived in Europe, people went crazy with it. It was like the crack epidemic. You had people, I think they were overreacting to the memory of their grandmother having 12 kids or something like that. So they decided they would make up for it. They only had to have one or
Well,
none.
I want to tell you, folks who have had a lot of kids, I mentioned my friends the Mutzes, they don't maybe they do realize what an encouragement they are to other people. My grandmother was one of 17 kids. Now I think to myself, imagine if her parents had quit earlier, I would literally not exist. You've got to factor that in. Anyway, this is a whole different conversation. But I think that what you're talking about, really the issue with Islam taking over Europe, is that Europe is no longer Europe. Europe doesn't know what it believes. Europe doesn't believe. They took any reference to God out of the Constitution of the European Union. In other words, the one thing that you could say without any doubt created Europe as Europe, the concept of Europe, was Western Christianity. This is the history of every nation in Europe, everyone. And suddenly they said, no, we don't want anything to do with this. They've really lost any sense of who they are, what they're defending. If you go to England, you go to Germany, you go to France, Muslims have, culturally speaking, almost taken over.
Right, and they're having all the kids, and you know, I think this is a disease that Europe might recover from, but it needs a chance to recover from it. It's like Europe has an immune suppressant disease, like it's got HIV or AIDS, and Islam is just like pneumonia sweeping in and taking the patient away because he has no immune system. If you don't think that the life is good enough to be worth replacing yourself and having kids, then you're not going to think it's worth catching flack to try to keep the Muslims from taking over your country. Because what difference does it make? You'll be dead soon. It won't happen before you're dead. God willing, you'll be dead soon enough, and then it won't matter anyway. I really think that's what's going on. If you don't think life is good, you're not going to have kids, you have no stake in the future.
Right, and I mean, I wouldn't say just life is good, but God says, "Be fruitful and multiply." He says, "Children are a blessing." The Bible commands these things, and if you don't believe that, you just say, "Well, who's to say?" And I'm going to take the easier road, folks. We'll be right back with John Zmirak.
So anyway, that's the bottom line. Without a belief in God, countries and civilizations are doomed.